So my name is Ione Lewis and I'm a director and founder of Grief Journeys. And here in the background, you can see John Fulcher, our treasurer, and we have the AGM that's happening after this. So we invite our members and anybody who's interested to stay online. So I'm going to start by an acknowledgement to country and a brief introduction to David and his fantastic work in narrative therapy and suicide loss and the experiences of people who experience suicidal feelings. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting all around Australia on the lands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and acknowledge leaders past, present and emerging, and just take a minute to ground yourself on the land that you're meeting with us today. And John and I are on the lands of the Gadigal people in Wollongong, New South Wales. So first of all, I'd like to introduce David and thank him for collaborating with Grief Journeys for this webinar. So David lives and works in Sydney. He's a faculty member of the Dulwich Centre and an honorary clinical fellow at University of Melbourne School of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences. He has extensive experience in individual, couple and family therapy, primarily through his independent therapy practice, Sydney Narrative Therapy, and he currently works part-time as a group therapist at U-Space, a psychiatric unit for young people in Sydney. So David, over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ione, and hello everyone. I just want to double check that the sound is coming through okay. Is that okay? Good, yep. Good. Well, I also wanted to acknowledge that I am on Gadigal country and want to pay respects to Aboriginal people and elders, past, present and emerging. And I have another couple of acknowledgements, actually. One of them is Ione Lewis and her work in not only getting this seminar up and running, which I think takes quite a lot. There's numerous emails, etc. But her dedication to this area of work, I really want to acknowledge Ione in what she has done. I want to acknowledge all of you who have turned up on a Saturday morning. I don't know what the weather is like. Are we sort of spread across Australia a bit, or how diverse is this? So who's not from Sydney? Put your hand up if you're not from Sydney. All right, yeah, well, that's quite a lot. Well, look, in Sydney, it's an incredibly beautiful morning, and I'm quite close to the beach. And anyway, I'm just imagining you might well want to be somewhere else at times through this talk. So thank you so much for turning up. Now, I also want to acknowledge that this is a tender topic. It's a tender topic, and I think all of us in some way will be touched by it or have some experiences of it, myself included. You know, my mother died from suicide when I was 11, and so I've been grappling with this as a theme for my life, throughout my life as well. So I just hope that what I share and what we speak about does give justice to the people who have passed away, but also to our experiences and other people's experiences when we're either bereaved or when we're kind of grappling with wanting to die or suicidal experience. Okay, so my intention, I hope this doesn't sound too daggy, is just to look at a PowerPoint, to go through a PowerPoint, and I've pulled together quite a lot, and I understand this gig is meant to go for about 45 minutes. So, you know, there'll be a bit of pace to it, but I'd really invite you to sort of, if there's a particular point you're interested in, just kind of pause put your hand up or something. Ione, will you keep an eye on the chat box? If someone has a specific question, would you be able to alert me to it?
Yeah, Denise.
I won't be doing that so much as.
Yeah, Denise is going to be moderating the chat box.
Okay.
And do you want her to raise the questions when we get to discussion time?
Probably at the end, but if someone really is really confused, or something's not making sense, or the language use or whatever is a bit awkward for you, please interrupt me. That'll be totally fine.
Great.
All right. So I'm just going to get the PowerPoint up, and then we'll get started. All right. So do the first pretty slide. Now this is what I propose. As it was spoken of, I will be kind of putting at the center of the talk, like narrative approaches to working with grief and bereavement when someone has ended their life, but also about suicidal experience in general. I'm doing a lot of work with young folks who do want to die or are suicidal. So I will be speaking a fair bit about that work as well. I'm going to be speaking specifically about these 4 themes of narrative practice. Narrative practice is there's a whole lot of different things I could say. So I'll just be touching on these 4 themes that I think are quite relevant to the theme of suicidal experience and bereavement with suicide. I'm going to look at the issue of language. Language use is it's an unbelievably contentious thing in mental health and psychiatry. It is, consumers, so-called consumers, or people with lived experience, or those with insider experiences around mental health problems or suicidal experience, often find it very difficult to agree on language use. So I do want to have a little look at it, because I remember I was running a group for parents at use space when their children, or when their child is in use space, which is a psychiatric unit. And there was incredible sensitivity around how suicide was spoken about. I remember it was visceral. A failed suicide attempt, for instance, was like a horrible kind of phrasing for a parent. So just to have a little look at the issue of language, and language, of course, is really swept up in issues of power. Now, one of the things I also wanted to just briefly touch on, and it's some of the thinking I've been doing recently, is quite often in this field, and in life more generally, I think, is that we get given particular norms about how people should respond to problems. One has to develop your distress tolerance skills. One has to really get better at mindfulness, etc. Now, I'm not saying those things are bad things, but narrative practice is very interested in trying to locate that which people are doing and delicately making a bigger deal of that, so they become stories. So I think one of the things that has become a little bit of a norm, or just an expectation, is that people locate hope. And I think hope is actually an awkward concept, I think, if one is suicidal. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, I'll speak about a project I've been involved in a few years ago with my colleague and friend Marnie Sather, where we looked at ways that people get through a bereavement through suicide. And we'll just have a look at that for a while at the end. All right. Now, the first thing I want to say in terms of some narrative practices, or narrative principles actually, that are of assistance for us when we're doing this work, or even if we're family members or friends of those who are really contemplating dying, is that with narrative practice there would be always an assumption that people and their communities, or their networks, or their families, are in some way responding to the difficulties. There's some way responding to it. They're maneuvering around the sort of the heavy weight of despair. They're finding ways to grapple with it. And in this grappling and maneuvering and response, people are generating skills of life. They're generating skills that we can notice, delicately pull out of the conversation and explore it and make it larger and more richer so that people can step into it more. Now, one of the things I do often in the groups is I will record, often pretty regularly, sort of word for word, what I hear of these skills. People often in the shadows of despair think they have nothing, that they're doing nothing in their life, that they're doing nothing to deal with despair or suicidal experience. But if we're delicate enough in our conversations with friends, family members, children, clients, we can hear just the little snippets of what it is that's keeping people alive. This is just an example of it. By that time, I'll have something else to live for. This is just a small story that I heard a young person say in a group once. I was watching a TV show years ago and a kid died. My mum said I couldn't handle it if one of my kids died, and I knew I couldn't do it to her. So I thought, and I know this gets a little dark, I'll have to wait until she died until I end my life. However, I think by that time I'll have something else to live for. And she's pressuring me so she can have grandchildren. Okay, so that's just a little thing, a little story about what's keeping this particular young woman, I remember when she said it, alive. You know, she has to wait till her mother dies before she ends her life, but actually when she thinks about it, she'll probably have something that she's going to live for. Now, that last sentence was kind of like a throwaway line, and she's pressuring me so she can have grandchildren. It was like a throwaway line, but I really, really wanted to rescue it and put it in her story. Partly I wanted to do that because I think when we're doing this work, when we're having these conversations, if they're unrelentingly intense, unrelentingly serious, and the tone is heavy, I think we can paint ourselves into a corner. So the more that we can notice when things are a bit lighter, that things are less intense, and bring that into the conversation, I think the more that we can build on the stories and the experiences that are outside of suicidal experience or despair. Okay, so that there's just a little lightness and a little bit of humor in that last comment. So I really wanted to bring that into the conversation. So that's one thing I would be emphasizing. What I have sometimes spoken of as in narrative practice, not just double storied, not just the problem story and also that experiences outside of the problem, but a double toned conversation. In other words, intense and less intense where we can. Okay. Now, next slide. Now, what I want to emphasize next, and it's very much a narrative idea, although it's a pretty, especially in the realm of cultural anthropology and more social psychology, the idea that lives are shaped in context, they're not shaped internally. So this is incredibly relevant in suicidal experience. There has been a significant critique of the linking of mental illness and suicidal experience or suicide. There's been a significant critique of that, that the two don't have to go together by any means. Okay? So if psychiatry and psychiatric understandings do step in, people are much more likely to think that they're individually problematic. But I'm just thinking of a colleague and a friend of mine from Vancouver, Vicky Reynolds, and she writes amongst a fair bit of things that she writes about in terms of suicidal experience. She says, hate kills. Hate kills. I know it's a heavy phrase, but she works with young folks and we know it in our worlds, you know, when there's racism, when there's homophobia, when there's transphobia, when there's poverty, when there's abuse, when you've been treated very badly, when you've been sexually assaulted, etc. Those are the things that we want to put the focus on. We want to emphasize the context that sparked despair, that sparked a sense that there's nothing to live for. We want to emphasize the context. We don't want to locate the problem within individual young lives or in any life. Okay, so that's why Vicky says hate kills. If you're at the receiving end of hate, it's pretty hard to find a place to live sometimes. All right, so one of the things that I do is in the groups with the young folks, and this might sound like a strange thing to do, but it is actually often an incredibly generative thing to do, is we together write letters to problems. So if the problem is anxiety, it's Dear Anxiety. If the problem is emptiness, it's Dear Emptiness. If the problem is anorexia or self-hatred or weed or alcohol, the problem is Dear Weed, Alcohol, etc. I'm going to share with you 2 letters to suicidal thoughts. Now, this is a narrative practice of externalizing so that whatever is considered the problem is separate from the person and the person's in some relationship to the problem. These letters kind of personify the problem of suicidal thoughts. It doesn't reside in individual people, it resides in the context of people's lives. Okay? It's externalized from them. It also can be playful. I don't mean to trivialize the seriousness of this experience, but letters to problems can be playful. And that can provide some space, as I was talking about before, for openings to other territories of life that aren't about despair and wanting to die. Okay, so the first one, I'm inviting you to notice what it is, what's the context that has sparked a sense of wanting to die? What's the context? So I'm inviting you not to name this young person as a suicidal young person or who has a diagnosis of major depression or endogenous depression or whatever. I kind of lose track of all the updates of these DSM categories. But I'm inviting you to just think of what it is that has shaped this experience. Ione, would you do me a favour and read the letter? It's just a page.
Sure.
Thank you.
Dear suicidal thoughts, for over 10 years you have constantly been on my mind. Each friendship, school exam, running competition and body weight determined whether or not I was worthy of living. You have been building in strength over the years, capturing every failure, every time I was hurt and used, every time I was invalidated and pushed to the side like I was no one, and every kilo I failed to lose. You capture all these past events into this deadly memory bank to pull out when I was at my weakest, to give me reasons to leave this beautiful world. I have come to idolize you because I truly believe that I'm not worthy of life and that I will always be empty and that I have nothing to offer. But on the contrary, I despise you for suffocating me at my weakest moments. Sometimes I start making steps in the right direction, building strong relationships and discovering that music and travel are things that I hold important in life. But somehow you manage to creep back into my life and make happiness seem impossible. Please give me time to breathe in the air around me and enjoy the simple things in life.
Thank you so much, Ione. Thank you. So I think hopefully it's pretty clear that, you know, the pressure of friendships and perhaps how this young woman is meant to be socially, the pressure of school exams, the pressure of running competitions. I remember this young woman was quite an elite athlete. The pressure of body image and weight. These are things that are in the context of life. These are things that are in the that's been happening for her that has shaped such despair. Okay, but I do want to just say that there are if we had more time, I'd ask you these questions so that to invite you to locate the weak points, those times when suicidal experience are not able to show up in this young woman's life. So one is that she sees the world as beautiful. Another is that she really wants to breathe in the air around her. She wants to enjoy the simple things in life. These are the sorts of things, music and travel. These things are important to her. These are the things we build on that stand outside of the suicidal experience, okay? So that's what we might do in our conversations with our family members, friends, or clients. All right, so the next one, I hope you don't mind having another read. There's just 2 letters. I thought these 2 letters were quite, they're quite sort of engaging, actually. Well, I mean, all the letters are engaging, but these ones I thought might be useful to share.
Dear suicidal thoughts, you are a backpack I never chose to put on, and yet I've been carrying you for years now. You somehow get heavier and heavier, or maybe I'm just getting tired, but you know I'm tired, don't you? You know exactly how tired and overwhelmed I am, and those are the moments you choose to add the extra weight. Very sneaky. The extra weight of carrying you is making it impossible for me to look forward or make any plans. And now I'm stuck on the spot. I feel like there is no forward, just where I am now. Everyone else moving around me, time passing, and me standing still with my heavy ass backpack that I can't even remember putting on. I can barely lift my head up to see the sun now with your weight on my back. If you had your way, I'd believe it was completely dark everywhere. You remind me every day about bipolar suicide numbers. I have little interest in statistics. I'm only one person, and I would be of little statistical significance if I lived or didn't. You can keep your statistics to yourself. But I get it. You're trying to get rid of me. Not very nice of you, but I suppose we all have our own agendas. I have the advantage over you, though. The human body, though poorly designed in parts, wants to live. I've survived your multiple attempts on my life so far. You aren't nearly as good an assassin as you think you are.
Okay, so it's it's a young woman who wrote that letter, and she was really happy for me to share that. She wrote it fairly recently, but one of the things, there's many aspects of that letter that I think that really stand out to me. And if we had more time, I'd be interested in your thoughts. But one of them is, I think that it's sort of research and statistics. That's the context that is giving shape to or sparking a more powerful suicidal experience. I think it's statistics and research. And I think that's a very, very important ethical dilemma we need to grapple with, really, as a field, and in my field, as a therapist, as a social worker. So, I just think that's something for us to keep in mind. So, by the way, with these letters, they are often, young people often find them so helpful that I have done them with, and not every young person finds them helpful exactly, but quite often we'll do this and they'll say, look, I want to start my family meeting by reading this letter out. Okay, so I think these letters can really do a whole lot of things, but one of them is it takes the burden off the individual young person as being the problem. The problem is the suicidal thoughts that sit somewhere else. The problem is the anorexia or whatever it is, okay? But it's one way that young people can be less of a burden, less the center of the problem with these letters, and they can be very, very helpful in getting a family meeting started, when often family meetings can be quite contentious, can be quite difficult. All right, next slide. To be honest, I don't have a way of knowing the time. Ione, what's the time and how far into it are we?
It's 5 to 11, and you can keep going to 10:30, 11:30. There's before we have discussions.
11:30. So that's in 35 minutes, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to say a little bit, and we might have, wish I could see if you'd be interested in me I do have a transcript. It's a short one. It was only about a 10-minute conversation or 5-minute conversation. Is there some way to know whether you'd want me to just quickly go through that transcript, and Ione could, yeah, we could have a look at that. All right. Now, I just wanted to share this transcript because quite often what can happen, and it's not like I'm thinking every time someone responds to a difficulty that they're doing something that's helpful for their lives. Like when you respond to a difficulty by cutting, it's not like that's uncomplicated. When you respond to a difficulty by smoking copious weed or something, it's not like that's uncomplicated. But I do want to just really assert that we can try and make meaning of those actions that often in my field get called dysfunctional coping mechanisms. So whatever gets called dysfunctional coping mechanisms, in narrative practice, it's up for investigation. It's up for some sort of meaning making. So with Sam, although in the transcript his name is Stuart, so sorry about the confusion, but they're both pseudonyms. Sam was, it was difficult for the treating team in two ways. One was that Sam was saying, when I leave here, I'm just going to suicide, I'm going to kill myself. And the second thing is that he was getting more and more withdrawn. Okay. Now, what often happens in a mental health service or in families or whatever, we can be exasperated, can't we? But when someone withdraws, they can get spoken of as resistant, not trying. That can be a symptom of depression. I was refusing to step into those kinds of meanings when thinking of Sam. I was wondering whether withdrawal had an intention, okay? and whether that intention would be something to be honoured. You know, I didn't want to categorise it as a symptom of depression or some sort of symptom of borderline personality disorder. I was interested in what that might say about an intention he holds and if that intention might be positive. Okay, so now one of the things I did, and I'm probably saying quite a lot here, and I hope it's not too dense, but I asked him if he wouldn't mind contributing his story to the Way Out's document. So I have a living document, it's an ever expanding document of vignettes and stories from young people about how it is that they keep themselves alive in the face of suicidal experience. At the moment, the document's, I don't know, about 11 pages long. And there's about maybe 50 stories or something. So I was asking him if he wanted to contribute. And I think one thing that we can find in the work or in our conversations is if someone's asked to contribute to someone else's life, asked to contribute to other young folks who will be struggling with suicidal experience or other people who are struggling with suicidal experience, they often find a story. They often find some know-how. It's like they'll be, people can be for others more than they are for themselves. I find this a very common experience. So the invitation to contribute to someone else's life often means someone finds a story that they otherwise couldn't find. They find some know-how that they otherwise couldn't find. Okay, so this is just I just wanted to give you a sense of how I'm not categorizing behavior, but I'm actually trying to make meaning of things that often get called dysfunctional coping mechanisms. In this case with Sam, or Stuart, as it will be in the transcript, it was withdrawal. Okay, withdrawing from the treating team, withdrawing from his parents, not really talking to anybody. I knew that was the case, so I didn't make this conversation very long. Okay, and I just want to say, just before we spoke, I did give him a copy of the living document, How We Deal with Way Out Thoughts, okay, which is the document around that I said before about all the stories and vignettes about how young people, what life-saving kind of skills they're accumulating in the face of suicidal experience. Now, Ione, would you mind doing Stuart's part? And it's about 3 slides long. So I did want to see how you're going with the wanting to die thoughts. Do you mind if we talk about them?
No.
Oh, okay. Look, how are they going?
Well, they are still there. I know I will end my life when I leave here.
Yeah, look, that sounds tough. You know, I think I gave you the How We Deal with Way Out Thoughts document, the document that includes stories from young people who come here about how they deal with way out thoughts or wanting to die thoughts or suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, you gave it to me.
Look, it's fine if you didn't get a chance to read it. As you were talking just then, I thought it could be useful to add some of your ideas to the document, as it can be good for others to hear stories about how hard it can be too, or how strong way out thoughts can get. But I don't mean to put pressure on you.
I could give it a go.
Well, maybe you could say a little bit about how tough it is. I know those wanting to die thoughts have been so strong. Is it okay if I write down some of your ideas down to possibly add to the How We Deal with Way Out Thoughts document? You can tell me what you think about adding something to the document when we have finished talking.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I feel alone in the world. I have nothing and nowhere to go to. No friends, no family. It seems that no one understands and there's no one to reach out to.
Right, it sounds so horrible. I'm sad to hear that.
I don't reach out now. I've stopped doing that.
Yeah, okay.
I've heard people say to me, you should really try this or this. But, I don't think they can say that as they haven't been through something like this.
Yeah, sure. You want people to offer ideas or solutions if they know something of how hard life can be, of how desperate you can get?
Yes, otherwise people just don't know. And they can say things that can make you feel so much worse.
Could you say some more about how much worse you can feel?
So if I reach out and get disappointed with the response, I can feel so much lower. It happens all the time. This is terrible, as then I feel even more that there is nothing to live for.
Yeah, that sounds terrible, Stuart. You said before that you don't reach out now. Look, it gives me a picture of you. I'll say the picture I get, but feel free to disagree with me. I get the sense that by not reaching out, you might be protecting yourself from feeling even lower than you already feel, or protecting yourself from feeling even more strongly that there is nothing to live for. I wonder what you think. I might be wrong.
Yeah, that's probably right, I guess. I think I don't reach out anymore for a bit of spite too.
Okay, look, I respect your honesty there, Stuart. So not reaching out can be about protecting yourself from feeling even lower or feeling even more strongly that there is nothing to live for, and for a bit of spite.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me asking another question.
No.
Is it possible then to say that you have mostly good intentions when you don't reach out?
Yeah, I suppose. But I wish that people could be better to speak with. It feels like shit.
Yeah, it's not good, huh? Can I check? What's it like to think that you have positive intentions?
It's good, as I don't have many positives at the moment.
Look, I'm glad that you can find a positive amongst the heavy power of these wanting to die thoughts. And I appreciate you being open to this conversation we are having. Could I ask another thing? Tell me if that's too many questions.
No, go ahead.
Is it fair enough to say that you could be doing that protection thing deliberately?
Yeah, I guess so.
What's that like to think, that you're doing something deliberately to protect yourself?
It's a small success. I don't see it as a success at first glance, but when I think about it in retrospect, it is.
That's nice to hear, Stuart. I really appreciate you speaking with me about this tough topic. Look, is it okay if we finish there? Did you want to speak about anything else?
No, we can leave it there.
And is it okay if your words are donated to the document, How We Deal with the Way Out Thoughts?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, I'll pull your words together now and show it to you later to see if you're happy with how I put it. All right. So, folks, and I don't have an example of the story, or the story was just pulled straight out of our conversation and added another story to the document. All right, so I wanted to do a couple of things there, is to explore the intention of his withdrawal, Stuart's withdrawal. It was about protecting himself from feeling even lower, and then another couple of intentions. In spite, and the spite was quite interesting and honest. But it was, I also wanted to kind of explore the issue of him taking action or agency. You know, that's why I asked the question, are you doing it deliberately? What's it like to think you're doing something deliberately? So he's intervening in his life, and that can be something that's so helpful for people to realise. Alrighty, so I'll just go to the next slide, and I hope this is okay going through this reasonably quickly, because they're reasonably big stories. Everybody going okay with this? Is it all right? Okay. Now, one of the things I also want to share, and this is, I'll just make this kind of quick, but I think that when people are individually required to come up with a story or to speak of their experience, I think it can be a bit of a burden. It can be quite tough. So one of the things we can do in conversations with maybe friends and family and clients is that we can have a stock of experience that we've accumulated. And that is, for instance, this Way Out Thoughts, this is how we deal with Way Out Thoughts document. This quote from Jeanette Winterson, who is I've shared this a lot in trainings, but it really gets across, I think, an intention of the sentiment of joining people, the sentiment of a sort of a collective experience. And it gets across what I feel like I'm regularly doing in these groups with young folks. So I'll just read it out. Jeanette Winterson is an English writer who she wrote, her first book was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which was about same-sex attraction, and it became, I think, one of the most successful and loved BBC series of all time, actually. But she wrote in her 2012 memoir, this on page 9, I believe in fiction, in the power of stories, because that way we speak in tongues, we are not silenced. All of us, when in deep trauma, find we hesitate, we stammer, there are long pauses in our speech, the thing is stuck. We get our language back through the language of others. We can turn to the poem, we can open the book. Somebody has been there for us and deep dive to the words. Okay, so I think in this work, we could probably change the word language to story. We get our stories back through the stories of others. So the analogy with poem and book, which I think is very relevant often for people. It could also be song and Netflix series. But, or podcast, we can get our stories through the podcasts, songs, or books of others. But I think it can be that we get it's the stories of others that we hear, especially in groups or through documents that we can hold. So I'm just going to share with you a real brief snapshot of how I do that in groups. I will have the document, which at this stage is 9 or 10 pages. We'll read through it because it's so long now, we only read 1 or 2 per page. Otherwise it takes too long and people lose focus. And then I'll ask them a couple of questions. And then people will resonate with some stories and not others. And even when you don't resonate with a story, you find your own story. So I'm just going to share with you a couple of stories in the document and how I do this. So this is just one story that is part of now, as I said, about 50 perhaps, over about 10 or 11 pages. I will read it out. When I can't live for myself, I live for my family. I can live for others too. When I can't live for myself, I live for my family. Experiencing daily suicidal ideas can overshadow everything the people who look after me have done. But looking back on every hard experience, I see that Mum has been by my side. I look back on Christmas Day last year, I was ready to die and I had a plan. I sat on the floor panicking and screaming and telling my mum to leave me, to leave the house, but she wouldn't. I have a support system who have unconditional love for me despite everything I've been through and put them through. To take my life would disrespect everything my mum and my family have done for me. Okay, so that's just one story that this particular person you'll see resonated with. I asked these two questions. I put them on the whiteboard. What was sparked for you in what we read? What was sparked for you in what you do or what you might hope to do? Okay, so I always assume people are responding. What are they doing already? Or what might they hope to do as a result of what they've read? And this next story was just an example of a resonance with that particular story we just read. Sorry, it's very text heavy, this one, but I thought it was a very lovely story. Ione, do you want to read it? Would you mind?
Sure. For me, that's enough right now. For me, thinking about all the people my death would hurt doesn't really stop way out thoughts. I reason to myself that if the people who loved me knew the pain I was in and had been in for years, they wouldn't blame me for taking the way out. I feel guilty that I don't love them enough to want to stay alive, but the way out thoughts don't care. One thing I have found recently that helps is thinking about what I'd miss in my friends' lives if I died. Maybe I'm too much of a fuck up to ever be happy or do anything with my life, but I know that they will go on to have jobs and babies and partners and birthdays, and I want to be there for that. I want to see what they will look like when they are 40 years old. I want to know how many children they will have, or if they will have any at all, if they stay in the same jobs they started, if they will travel. I know that almost anyone can be a good friend and someone could replace me in a heartbeat, but for me, that's enough to keep me going right now. I would be living not for anyone else, but for knowing the changes. And when I'm distressed, that is the only thing that can make the thoughts go away. It's a role that only I can fill, and I'm good at it, and I get contentment from it. That's enough right now.
All right, thank you, Ione. I wanted to emphasise too that often with these stories, we're not after triumphant stories. We're not after incredibly grand turning points. I was really interested in her phrase, "That's enough right now," because that's often what it takes. That's often what is life-saving. It can be something that is just enough. It's just enough. Okay, now, I'm sorry, Ione, would you mind saying how much longer I've got?
Sure, you've got 17 minutes.
Okay. I might just, I'll just go over this one. I'm just going to say a little bit about language use. So one of the things that we want to be thinking about, I think, in this realm is language. My dear friend and colleague Marnie Sather was presenting her PhD research to the School of Social Work in Melbourne just on Wednesday. And one of the things that she's been doing in researching women's experiences of their husbands suiciding was the question of language. And the language, as I've said, it can be so difficult. It can be so difficult. But there was just some really quite beautiful examples. So there was a child who was interviewed in her research who said when the mother or the partner of this man who suicided was feeling so dreadful about what happened, the child said, look, Mum, Dad was on a journey and that journey was not going to finish in old age. So this is a very different way to saying something like completed suicide. It's a beautiful way. I mean, apart from the fact that it's an offering of care from a child, it was a very beautiful sentiment. And there was another one that there was a man who suicided who was very much into chess. And one of his children said, look, I think probably Dad was checkmated. Dad was checkmated. And it was a beautiful sentiment too. So what we can do in this realm, this heartbreaking realm, to find language and phrasing that is less harsh, that is more particular, that is more local, that is more, let's say, true to the lived experience of the families and the people who have ended their lives. Okay. I'm just going to share with you a slightly this is going to sound strange to speak of in the same sentiment, talk about playfulness, but in a slightly playful way of doing that with people who are grappling with wanting to die and suicidal experience is I've started this dictionary, and it's in response to this particular critique from a consultant, a person with insider experience in the mental health system, named Ron Coleman, but he critiqued it in this way. And I think it's a very strong critique. And I think people in my field need to engage with this critique, actually. Psychiatry takes away my experience, molds it into their model, and then hands it back to me in a way unrecognizable to me. Okay, so it's a strong critique. And it's an urging for us to not do that. Okay, we don't want to be doing this work or having these conversations so people feel alienated from their own experience. One way to do that is, this is just one way I've engaged with this, and the young people love it. They love this dictionary of obscure experiences that I've got. I don't know, there's about 60 entries so far, and every time I run a group on it, they really, really love it. But it's finding specific experiences that we're not going to then try and repurpose or repackage or funnel through the lens and the language of psychiatry. We're going to leave it in the people's own spoken words and in their playful engagements with how to describe these experiences. Okay, so I'll just share with you 2 examples of how we can engage with this critique from Ron Coleman by, for instance, doing a dictionary of obscure experiences. Okay. So a person once, when we were doing this, said, David, look, there's this thing. It's something like the thought, I wish I'd never said that when mentioning suicidal ideas or self-harm and people overreact. Happens all the time. All I want is a good conversation, and people get all worked up and they might call the ambulance or they tell me to stop it or whatever. And this actual experience I found unbelievably common. That sense of regret that one's shared, how desperate you are or how much you're grappling with self-harm or how much you have self-harm, and people overreact. So I did want to kind of get that experience down in this dictionary, and we hadn't named it for a long time. And then this young person handed me their sheet at the end of a group about a month later and wrote next to that experience, because it wasn't named as a dictionary entry exactly, it was just the experience was there. He named it a bouquet of oopsie daisies. I think that's pretty funny. So anyway, so it's how we can engage with these ideas in a playful way, in a sense. And then the young people say, and because Harry Potter is often so resonant for so many of us. I love Harry Potter, and often the young people do. The Hagrids. You remember Hagrid? He was a character who often said, I shouldn't have said that. So they love the Hagrids as a synonym for this experience. Then there's Schrodinger's emotion. This is a person actually who was who's studying science and was interested in the Schrodinger's cat experiment, thought experiment. And she spoke about the feeling of being both really suicidal and really anxious about dying. It's like 2 mental health problems competing. Okay, so I think that's not an uncommon experience. And it's actually something that keeps people alive. The fear of dying does keep people alive. Many young people have said that to me. And then this last one I think is quite funny. Anybody, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Inception. It's this kind of complicated storyline where the protagonist has to go within a dream, within a dream, I think. Like it's very layered. And we had this thing where someone also named being sad about your sadness or distressed about your distress. It just makes you sad that you like this. And I think that's not an uncommon experience. It's not, we don't particularly have a word for it, I don't think, in English. And I didn't want to say that's a symptom of depression. And someone said, oh, I know what that is. And this was about a month later too. I know what we can call that experience. We've got to call that shitception. It was hilarious. It was like Inception turned on its head. Like, anyway, look, I'm just sharing this as a particular practice. We go through all of these dictionary entries in a group. People say often people say I relate to all of them, 60 entries. Sometimes people say I don't relate to that many, but there's a few, and that's helped me explain my experience, and I'm really quite relieved about that. And then they might add their own. Okay, so this is a way that we don't impose professional language. We don't impose psychiatric language. If people want to describe their experience in psychiatric terms, that's fine. I really want to make that clear. That's fine. If people say I've got bipolar disorder, that's fine. All right. I just wanted to say something. I'll just be very quick about the notion of hope, because hope, I think, is being it's being normalized as the solution to suicidal experience. But I think hope can be problematized, as with anything that's considered as the solution for an experience. I think it becomes a norm that people can fail in relationship to. Hope, for instance, is quite a high bar. Remember that story just before? That's enough for now. She's not speaking about hope. She's speaking about just trying to imagine how she wants to hear the next things that happen in her friends' lives and to be the witness to her friends' unfolding life stories. And it's enough for now. She's not speaking about hope. I'm not against hope. Like, hope is, in some instances, a good thing. But hope, I think, makes sense to be normalized or to be the solution in a Christian-dominant culture such as ours, because hope is one of the three virtues in the Christian tradition. It's not like some innate thing that we carry that we've got to locate within our bodies and give expression to it. It's something that's of culture, in this case, I think, Christian culture. So it is something difficult to attain, and people therefore can fail in relationship to it. But it is also something that when we speak about life-saving skills people hold, they are very diverse. They don't have to be hope. No, this just happened yesterday in a meeting, and I won't in a group, but we won't go through it because we'll get on to the exercise, to the project. I'll just say this a little bit briefly. Marnie Sather lost her husband to suicide. I lost my mother to suicide, and we're both narrative practitioners, both therapists. Marnie lives and works in Melbourne. I live and work in Sydney. And we came up with questions that we could give to therapists who could perhaps share with their clients, or about hearing not just what's hard in the bereavement in the face of suicide, but how it is that you kind of get through, how it is that you deal with it, how it is that you cope. Okay, so we devised a whole lot of questions. I can give you links to these questions. I can actually share the article that has all of the questions if you would be interested in that, and you can tell me that later, and I can send it on to Ione. But with all of these questions, they were sent out, and there's a certain safety, I think, with questions being devised, but they were double-storied questions. What's both hard about this experience, but how it is that you've coped or dealt with it. I'm just going to share with you an example of some of the questions and some of the responses. These are some of the drawings from we consulted B, who's an Aboriginal elder, and I won't go into the detail of that, but she was speaking about her experiences, and there's some very significant differences, I think, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous suicide, but she gifted us some absolutely beautiful artwork to add to this project. All right, so this is one question. And this question, you might see that there's a bit of, this question is, it's a little bit hazardous, so, but it is relevant. So often when someone has died through suicide, they have put some thought into how it is that someone might experience their suicide. Is it a note? Is it where they did it? Is it that they thought about a specific time when they didn't have the care of their children, etc.? Okay. So this question, did you have a sense or did you see evidence that the person in their suicide prepared you and or others for the fallout? Okay, so this is just one answer amongst many. In spending that day with everyone, I definitely had the picture in my head that he was letting them know that he wanted to protect them and that he would do whatever it took to ensure their safety. He had developed a relationship with law enforcement. They had told my sister how much they liked John and felt bad for him when he was overcome by the effects of schizophrenia. They checked in on him periodically, so I think John knew they would be able to share with my family how much he tried. These are preparations that I think John made for us. And these are different themes. It's about trying to build on this other story of how people coped, how people dealt with it. Have there been any special people, places or things that have helped reshape a positive meaning to your life after your loved one's suicide? This one was a slightly eccentric one. Ducks of all things. My daughter had a fondness for ducks in the local park. Otherwise, elephants. She had a passion for elephants. Her beloved soft toy, it was still in somewhat tattered existence after 27 years, was theoretically an elephant. So I have now acquired a collection of elephants that honour this, but no ducks or cats. They're very tender stories, aren't they? Community responses. What were the ways that members from your community responded to you and to the suicide of your loved one? Are there any particular responses that stand out? Could you tell a story about that? There was one conversation in particular that my sister and I had about how John had started to realise that the command voices were getting out of control and that he loved his girlfriend and daughter so much and didn't want to ever see them hurt. When I heard that, it immediately made sense to me that what had happened. My sister told me this in the context of preparing for his funeral, and that developed into a discussion of a collage of his life that showed his love for and protection of those around him whom he loved. Okay, there's just a few more examples. Has this person's suicide meant that you have commitments in your life or work that you wouldn't have otherwise had? Has it shaped particular life purposes? Yes, it has shaped my life's purposes. I have restructured my life from a university academic to work with the mentally disadvantaged and those needing psychological and psychotherapeutic assistance to deal with problems in their lives. A message to others. If you were to pass on a message to others who have lost a loved one to suicide, what would it be? I would say embrace the memories of your loved one. Embrace the person, the values they had. Bring them into your life. Celebrate the relationship with them and acknowledge and accept that they are a special person for you, that you did the best to show them your love and they loved you too. So we might have to leave it there, I think, with the timing of it. Is that right, Ione? Is it a bit time?
Yeah, that's just 1 minute ahead of time. And so well done. What a beautiful presentation. I think those questions at the end were so beautiful and something we can all take into our practice or use in our own grief recovery. I just want to thank you for sharing.